Many Muslims would haste to answer this question with a firm and resounding denial. Of course not, they would proudly shout. However, this is not the way true scholars of Islam should respond to such a shrewdly ambiguated question. This is not the way Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah would deal with such an issue. The proper way to respond to such a question is to start by asking, what exactly do you mean by religion, and what exactly do you mean by science? Note, by the way, that this is normally not the way this question is commonly posed among proclaimed intellectuals who usually address it one way or another. Usually they would say, is there a conflict between science and religion? Not between religion and science. Okay, notice the order. Why? Because usually the one addressing the question would raise it from a firm belief that whatever he calls science is the truth, or the ultimate source for knowledge of any truth about the world whatsoever. Whereas religion, or anything he would classify as one, according of course to his own belief system, would be the one held in question. If it agrees with science, whatever that is, then it's good, it's agreeable, okay, it's acceptable. If, however, it doesn't, then those who adhere to it have a serious problem and a profound crisis of faith on their hands, whatever the religion might be. But then again, as we pointed out earlier, the question so written is messed up, since both the terms science and religion are extremely ambiguous. And as we shall elaborate in this lecture, it's not an innocent ambiguity or an unintentional equivocation. In such cases, ulama or scholars of Ahlus Sunnah would insist on demanding a clear, unambiguous definition of what exactly is meant in such a question by both religion and science. Okay? They would do that because they know quite well how easily a philosopher could engage in all kinds of sophistry, playing with precisely such kind of ambiguity in such questions in order to win a debate or score a following. Centuries ago, for example, philosophers posed a trick question asking, can God create a rock he cannot carry? The question is designed in such a way that no matter how you respond, you'll make it look like there's something that your God cannot do. However, one can clearly see that the question itself is false, because it presupposes a contradiction. Obviously, by God, we mean the one and only being with complete unconditional omnipotence. There's nothing that he cannot do. That's by definition what we mean by God. And thus it follows logically that there can be no such thing as a rock he cannot carry. Its existence is by definition logically impossible. And so the question is actually thus, can God do something that is logically impossible? And the answer is, logical impossibilities are irrelevant to potency or power. The very meaning of the words potency and the very meaning of the word power, the very meaning of the word can, to begin with. It's irrelevant. If a being has power, then that being has nothing to do with the impossible. Okay? The logically impossible. The impossible here means something, the very existence of which would imply a logical contradiction. Alright? A similar example can be found in an ancient question posed by Islamic philosophers. Okay? They once asked, is man mukhayyar or musayyar? The word mukhayyar in Arabic could be taken to mean has a choice. However, it could also be taken to mean is free to create his own deeds, with no previous predestination whatsoever. The same ambiguity shrouds the other term musayyar. It could be taken to mean has no choice, and it could also be taken to mean his deeds are predestined by Allah. So obviously, you're doomed if you say yes, and you're doomed if you say no. The ambiguity is detrimental in such a question. And it is exactly how those innovators attempted to trick unsuspecting Muslims into accepting their case. This is why scholars of Sunnah decreed at the time that it would be an innovation to either claim that man is mukhayyar or that he is musayyar. Okay? Even the word jabr in Arabic was treated in the same manner. One has to be extremely clear and unambiguous when he speaks of such issues. In fact, I argue that the same is true of the term free will in English. A Muslim should not accept it or dismiss it offhand without first inquiring about the exact unambiguous meaning intended by its use. If by free will you mean that we humans have the prerogative and the ability to make free choices of what to say and what to do in this world, then yes, of course, we do have free will, obviously. However, Christian theologians, for example, wouldn't use it for such a meaning. They would take it to mean that human deeds and actions are their own creation. God, in the belief system, does not create human deeds. Whatever we choose to do, good or bad, does not follow his will in any sensible meaning whatsoever. And that's of course false. It defeats an entire pillar of faith in Islam, the belief in qada and qadr, or as the crude English term would go, predestination. Okay, this is an innovation that we call qadariyya in Islam. It's those who believe that Allah didn't actually predetermine anything at all. Some qadariyya would even go further, denying previous knowledge of all human deeds altogether. Not only does he not create them or will them to be in advance, he doesn't even know them in advance. Okay, so as you can see, Muslims should be extremely careful and cautious and wary about the use of words in any context that has to do with belief in Allah. Alright? Whenever someone asks you, do you believe in free will? You have to ask them first to define free will. What do you mean by free will? And if you're still not sure what they mean, then you should ask them to elaborate further and further until you're perfectly clear. Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah is famously quoted to have said that a great majority of all dispute among humans is due to ambiguity. So let's start by religion in this question. What do you mean by religion? First of all, people's belief systems and doctrines vary greatly and profoundly. So one needs to be very specific about the exact religion they mean. Okay? So there's no single thing that can be referred to as religion. Alright? Secondly, and more importantly, one needs to be clear on the definition of religion in this respect, since many people would hold certain beliefs that are indeed religious or occupy the place of religion in their cognitive structures without identifying them as such. Okay? I do not for a minute accept the common dictionary definition of the word religion as the belief in a particular deity. Okay? Buddhists would identify themselves as religious. Everybody would call them religious. Buddhism is a religion. It's classified as one internationally without ascribing themselves to a deity. Most Buddhists do not ascribe themselves to a deity, a creator. Some sects of Hinduism don't even believe in creation to begin with. Okay? So what is religion really? And when does a belief system qualify as religion or religious? Obviously, the popular definition we just mentioned is quite lacking. If you're going to ask whether science, whatever that is, conflicts with a particular belief system that we call religion, then we need to be clear what systems qualify as religion and what don't. I would argue that the best way to define religion is to say that it is a comprehensive system of beliefs about what's beyond this world, if any, and why we are here, why we are in this world. The latter, of course, would build upon the former. So if you're, for example, a pantheist, one who believes that the world itself is divine and that the cause of its being is within it, not beyond, then you would believe that there is no day of judgment and that you should internalize the purpose of your life and the source of your spiritual enlightenment. Everything comes from inside. The same is true of an atheist who doesn't believe in a supernatural deity, despite their insistence that what they embrace is not a religion, and that they do not revere any deity. They would in fact engage in religious practices by definition without calling them as such. Practices that are religious in fact in reality, while they don't call them as such, while they don't see them as religious practices. If you believe, for example, that it was nature that created you and that all credit is due to it alone for keeping you, then you are indeed deifying nature, taking it for a deity, even if you wouldn't call it a god. Even if you wouldn't pray for it, build a temple to go pray for it in that temple, okay? Or have particular acts of worship to dedicate to it, to nature. It is not uncommon among naturalists to speak of nature as though they were speaking of God. It's not uncommon. Some, in fact, did use the very word God in reference to natural law. Okay? One particularly famous example is Albert Einstein himself. Every time a Darwinian ascribes the act of selection to nature, they are indeed describing a godly attribute to it, in what is supposed to take the place of teleological beliefs in theistic religions. Those who believe that there is no day of judgment and that once we die, we just vanish out of existence, they do embrace a religious belief as such, every bit as much as those who believe in the resurrection. Perhaps some people would refrain from calling it a belief since they would not regard it with the same amount of certainty and absolution that adherents to theistic religions would, but this does not change the typology of the belief itself. A belief could be strong or weak, but it would still be your religion, nonetheless. Okay? A belief in God could be negative, negative belief, a stance of denial or rejection of any such being as God, but it would still classify as a belief nonetheless. A belief in the unseen, a belief in the metaphysical, or in what's beyond, in the supernatural, if you will. And it would still take the seat of religion all the same. I mean, look at what someone like Richard Dawkins is doing these days, publishing books to praise the atheistic beauty, the aesthetic beauty and spiritual fulfillment he feels in atheism, even doing his best to teach his beliefs to little children. Look at that man and tell me, honestly, that you really don't see a religious preacher, and an extremist at that. A belief system doesn't need to have scripture and prophecy, or even a formal institution or house of worship to classify religion. Okay? No need to have a book, no need to have sacraments, no need to have certain rituals or anything. Just look at the type of questions it purports to answer and the type of commitment it takes from those who embrace those answers, and you'll see exactly what others would call a religion. All right? The point we're making here is that regardless of whether or not you embrace a particular deity, and you worship a particular deity, you will be a slave to something that takes up the place of a deity in your life, no matter what you would call it. And regardless of whether or not you declare commitment and submission to a particular type of worship, you will in fact act every bit as though you're worshipping something, one way or another, no matter how godless you would like to think of yourself. This is why in the Quran, Allah does not identify atheists as a third additional party to those who worship Him, al-muwahhidun, and those who worship whatever else, al-mushrikun. Okay? A man is either muwahhid, one who worships Him alone, or mushrik, one who worships other things besides Him. Okay? There's no third faction, there's no third group of people, only those two. It makes no difference how you would identify yourself if, in fact, your deeds would classify you as a mushrik. You may be doing things that you would not call shirk when in fact they are. What matters is the true meaning of the deed, not the one you claim it to have. Alright? This is why when the mushriks of Quraysh claimed that they only worshipped their idols to bring them near to Allah, to favor them to Him, He condemned them for that claim in no uncertain terms in the Quran. How can a reasonable person even begin to assume that the Lord Almighty would approve of His creatures asking of each other things that should only be asked of Him alone, revering each other in a manner that is only worthy of Him alone, thereby raising them to a level of equality or partnership with Him? No sane, honest, truth-seeking person would be asked to only worship his Maker alone and only take Him for a God, and yet would counter that call by claiming that he only worships other creatures like himself and takes them for gods to please his Maker. That absolutely doesn't make sense.